I had just started my new job as a security guard at St. Mary's Hospital. It was an old building, with most of its sections abandoned for years. Only a small part of it was still used, and even that area felt strangely empty most of the time. The hospital was rumored to be haunted, but I didn't believe in ghosts. I took the night shift because it paid well and was usually quiet, which meant I could relax. My job was to watch the cameras and patrol the hospital once every hour. The first few nights were easy. I sat in the security room, watched the cameras, and walked around the hospital at regular intervals. Nothing unusual happened. The building was old, and there were a few strange noises, but I told myself it was just the wind or the old pipes. On the fourth night, things started to change. It was around midnight when I saw something strange on one of the cameras. The monitor showed the hallway of the abandoned wing of the hospital. No one was supposed to be there. The doors were locked, and that part of the building had been closed for years. But there, on the screen, I saw a figure. It was a woman, standing at the end of the hallway. She was wearing a hospital gown, her hair hanging down in front of her face. I blinked, thinking it was a trick of the camera, but when I looked again, she was still there. She wasn't moving, just standing there, facing the wall. A chill ran down my spine. I picked up my flashlight and decided to check it out. Maybe someone had gotten into the abandoned part of the hospital by mistake. I grabbed my keys and walked out of the security room, my footsteps echoing in the empty halls. The hospital was dark, with only a few lights on. The air was cold, and the silence felt heavy. I made my way to the door that led to the abandoned wing. The door was still locked, just as it should be. I unlocked it and stepped inside. The hallway was even darker than the rest of the hospital. I turned on my flashlight and shone it down the corridor. The walls were cracked, and the floor was covered in dust. I walked slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. When I reached the end of the hallway, there was no one there. The woman I had seen on the camera was gone. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Maybe it had just been my imagination, or maybe there was a problem with the camera. I turned around and started to walk back. That was when I heard it, a soft whisper coming from behind me. I froze, my flashlight shaking slightly in my hand. I turned around, but there was nothing there. The hallway was empty. I could feel my heart beating faster, and a cold sweat formed on my forehead. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing in the dark. There was no answer, just silence. I took a step forward, and that's when I saw it, a shadow moving at the end of the hallway. It was quick, disappearing around the corner before I could get a good look at it. I hurried back to the door, my footsteps echoing loudly in the empty space. I locked the door behind me and made my way back to the security room. I sat down in front of the monitors, my hands still shaking. I stared at the screen that showed the abandoned hallway, but there was nothing there now. Just an empty corridor. I tried to tell myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me, but deep down, I knew something wasn't right. The next night, I was nervous as soon as I arrived at work. I sat in the security room, watching the monitors closely. Midnight came, and I found myself staring at the camera that showed the abandoned wing. For a while, everything was quiet. But then, just like the night before, I saw her. The woman in the hospital gown was back. She was standing in the same spot, at the end of the hallway, facing the wall. This time, I didn't move. I just watched her, my heart pounding. Slowly, she began to turn around. Her face was still hidden by her hair, but I could see her head moving. She was looking at the camera. A cold fear washed over me, and I felt my hands go numb. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. I was frozen, staring at the screen. Suddenly, the monitor went black. All the cameras went out, and the security room was plunged into darkness. I jumped up, my chair falling over behind me. The lights in the hallway outside were still on, but the security room was completely dark. I grabbed my flashlight, my hands shaking as I turned it on. The beam of light cut through the darkness, and I moved it around the room, trying to see what had happened. The monitors were dead, the screens blank. Then, from behind me, I heard the whisper again. My blood ran cold. I turned around, the flashlight shaking in my hand. There, standing in the doorway, was the woman. Her hair was still covering her face, and her hospital gown was dirty and torn. "Who are you?" I shouted, my voice cracking. She didn't answer. She just stood there, her head tilted to one side. I took a step back, my flashlight aimed at her. "You need to leave," I said, trying to sound brave. But the truth was, I was terrified. My heart was pounding, and I could feel the sweat on my forehead. The woman took a step forward, and I saw her face for the first time. Her skin was pale, almost gray, and her eyes were hollow, empty sockets. A scream caught in my throat, and I stumbled backward, tripping over the fallen chair. I hit the ground hard, the flashlight slipping from my hand and rolling away. The room was plunged into darkness again, and I could hear her footsteps coming closer. I scrambled to my feet, my hands shaking as I searched for the flashlight. Finally, I found it, and I turned it on, shining the light toward the doorway. But she was gone. The doorway was empty, and the hallway outside was silent. I didn't wait to see if she would come back. I ran out of the security room, my footsteps echoing through the empty halls. I didn't stop until I was outside, the cold night air hitting my face. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. I knew I couldn't stay. Whatever was in that hospital, it wasn't human. I quit my job the next day. I never went back to St. Mary's Hospital, and I never want to. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear that whisper, and I remember the woman with the hollow eyes. After that night, I had trouble sleeping. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face, those empty sockets staring at me. I tried to convince myself it was just a nightmare, that my mind had played tricks on me. But deep down, I knew it was real. A few weeks later, I heard a story on the news. They were talking about St. Mary's Hospital. Apparently, another security guard had taken over the night shift after I left. He had been found dead in the abandoned wing of the hospital. The news report said it looked like he had fallen down the stairs, but I knew better. I couldn't stop thinking about it. I started to do some research, trying to find out more about the hospital's history. It turned out that St. Mary's had a dark past. Years ago, there had been a fire in the old wing of the hospital. Several patients had died, trapped inside when the fire spread. One of them was a woman, a patient who had been kept in isolation due to her strange behavior. They said she had been found in her room, her face burned beyond recognition. She had been one of the last to die, screaming for help as the flames consumed her. The other patients and staff had already evacuated, but no one had come back for her. The more I read, the more I realized that the woman I had seen was her, the patient who had been left behind. Her spirit was still in the hospital, trapped in the place where she had died. She was angry, and she wanted revenge. I couldn't just ignore it. I knew I had to do something, even though I was terrified. I reached out to a local paranormal investigator, a woman named Claire, who had experience dealing with spirits. I told her everything, about the hospital, the woman, and what I had seen. Claire agreed to help. She said we needed to go back to the hospital and try to make contact with the spirit. We needed to help her find peace, or she would continue to haunt the hospital and anyone who worked there. I was scared, but I knew it was the right thing to do. A week later, Claire and I went to St. Mary's Hospital. It was late at night, and the building was even more imposing than I remembered. The windows were dark, and the air was thick with a sense of dread. We made our way to the abandoned wing, the floorboards creaking under our feet. Claire carried a bag with her, a bag filled with candles, incense, and other tools she said would help us communicate with the spirit. When we reached the end of the hallway, Claire set up the candles in a circle on the floor. She lit them, and the flickering light cast strange shadows on the walls. The air was cold, and I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. Claire closed her eyes and began to speak, her voice calm and steady. She called out to the spirit, asking her to come forward. She told the woman that we were there to help her, that she didn't need to be afraid. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then I heard it, a soft whisper, just like before. The air grew colder, and I could see my breath in front of me. The candles flickered, and the shadows on the walls seemed to move. Suddenly, the woman appeared. She was standing at the edge of the circle, her face hidden by her hair. Claire didn't flinch. She kept her voice calm, telling the spirit that we wanted to help her find peace. The woman slowly lifted her head, and I saw her face again, those empty, hollow eyes. My heart was pounding, but I forced myself to stay still. Claire continued to speak, telling the woman that she didn't need to stay in the hospital any longer. She could move on, leave the pain behind. The woman stared at us for a long moment, and then slowly she began to fade. The air grew warmer, and the candles stopped flickering. The whispering stopped, and the woman was gone. Claire let out a breath and looked at me. "I think she's at peace now," she said. I hoped she was right. The hospital felt different, lighter, somehow. The sense of dread was gone, and the air no longer felt heavy. I knew that the woman had moved on, that she was no longer trapped in the place where she had died. After that night, I was finally able to sleep. The nightmares stopped, and the whispers were gone. I knew I had done the right thing, even though it had been terrifying. I never went back to St. Mary's Hospital, and I never wanted to.